Just kidding. Okay, week 4 of Culture and Schooling. Continuing on the magnificent book club of Melinda and Janine's. I still don't remember the name of the book. Teaching While the World Burns.
Teaching When the World is on Fire.
Something along the lines of that. So we mostly focus on the sections of
race
matters and gender and sex ed matter, correct? Yeah. So that's what we're at today. Now what do we do?
So do you want to just, basically we can go through our things and then we can connect it to, like, we can answer these questions.
Sure. So, like, go through what we read? Okay.
So the first one would be, like, my chapter that I read. So I read Black Teachers, Black Youth and Reality Pedagogy. And in it, they basically talked about how the school system isn't built with, like, children of color in mind. It's, like, built on, like, a colonial system and, like, stuff like that, which reminded me a lot of in our Indigenous education class.
Yeah.
Like the articles we've been reading about how it's a white system and it's not made to, like, respect other cultures or, like, incorporate other cultures and, like, their ways of learning and stuff like that.
Yep.
And then it talked about how it talked about how, hold on, my thing's messed
up. Take your time, no rush.
Yeah. Oh, there was, like, a good quote, and it said, it just said, when white middle-class norms or ideals are the benchmark for success, Black children fail, and we fail Black children. And then it just kind of talked about ways of incorporating the culture of your students into lessons and stuff like that. And it talked about, like, there's this really cool thing, because it was a science teacher who was writing this article, and they talked about how they incorporate this thing called Science Genius, or, like, there's this competition that exists called Science Genius, and it's where students make raps based on science concepts, and then they, like, perform them in, like, competition, which I think is really cool. And even if you don't, like, go to the actual competitions, like, it would be really cool to do something like that in your class. And it reminded me of this thing I found on YouTube, and I forget what it's called right now. I have it saved somewhere. And it's a competition where they present their scientific research in, like, fun and entertaining ways. So it could be, like, a comedy skit or a piece of art or, like, a, like, drama, like, theater thing. Like, it's really, really cool.
Yeah, you've told me about this before when we were in Walmart one day. And it's like,
I did.
It's like a conference or something, isn't it? Yeah, you've been excited about this for a long time. Yes.
So yeah, that it made me think of that.
Yeah.
And it also made me think of Indigenous education again, where we, I don't know if it was it must have been an article that we read, where it was talking about, it was in the video I watched. They mentioned this person named Lisa something, and she does this thing where she incorporates, like, culture and math of her Indigenous students. So it was like the math behind creating a drum or something like that. And, like, they did, like, this science fair walk or math fair walk where they would represent, like, all these things where math is found in, like, their culture, or, like, they could do it in anything really, but it was, like, a way of getting students to incorporate, like, their cultural knowledge and stuff like that, which I thought was really cool. So, like, even though a lot of these articles, like, talked about Black students, like, the concepts and things it gets you to think about, like, relates to, like, all students of color.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Exactly. Like, I think we both plan on teaching is pretty Eastern, Scottish, English, Indigenous areas. But that doesn't mean that we can't take this information and kind of mold it to other areas. I agree.
Yeah. So there was, because he called it reality pedagogy, what he was teaching. So it, like, talked about, like, incorporating, like, talking about what's actually happening in their everyday lives. and stuff like that. And you said that there was different steps or whatever to consider. So there is co-generative dialogues, co-teaching, which was really interesting because he talked about like giving students the opportunity to teach lessons in this class.
Yes,
And like,
I read something about that as well. Yes, keep going. Very interesting.
yeah. So that was like really cool to see because I never thought of it. It was like basically like the students were student teachers like us. And they
Mm-hmm.
made a lesson plan and taught a lesson. And like they were kind of like, it was really, just really cool. I don't know.
So in your chapter, did they teach about like Black issues in their community type of thing? Like, is that what they taught, or did they even tell you what they taught?
Yeah,
Or
but they could teach anything really. Yeah. So there was
cool,
other chapters that did like kind of talk about that too. But in this one, I think it was just like anything really. They could pick something that they want to teach the class.
cool,
And
very cool.
then um, there is cosmopolitanism, context, content, competition, and curation. So it just kind of like talked about like these how these different areas affect teaching and stuff like that, and what they do to incorporate
Right,
those into the style of teaching. So it was
cool.
just really cool. Made me think about a lot of things.
Yeah, really interesting. That sounds like a good one. So is that just your first chapter, or do you want to keep going? Or do you
I'm
want
just
me to
going in
go?
order of like they appear. So like we'll just go like in order of the
Oh, okay,
chapters. Does
cool.
that make sense?
Yep. Okay.
So next is yours actually. So the how one
Oh, one
elementary school.
elementary school sparked the city. Yeah, perfect. So that story was about how one elementary school had decided to do a Black Lives Matter movement day in their class and have like every single teacher who was a predominantly Black school wear like a Black Lives Matter T-shirt. But then it got like really kind of bombarded with like racism, and it got like made the news, and like all these right wings got super against it. And actually the day of, there was actually a bomb threat in the school, so they had to like cancel the event. But they didn't end up canceling the event. They did the bomb threat, and they almost had like this like the activities outside of the school, like just in the parking lot. And then it just talked about how then that entire school board wanted to bring this Black Lives Matters thing up, but how like when you're dealing with stuff with racism, it's really important that every single teacher has is completely on board, because like what type of message would it show if only certain teachers were wearing the shirts or doing the lessons on the problems and the issues and stuff like that? So what if only a few dozen teachers wore the shirts? Like, would that send the wrong message? And then they just sort of kind of let it settle, and then someone else brought it to the school board to do it again. It was like one of the very first times that like racial injustices pedagogy, like every single like place approved it, like the teachers union and the school board and the schools and everything. So then the whole school board had like a Black Lives Matter class, or teaching and mentoring for racial justice. They had a whole day. And then they talked about how this poor woman was a pregnant mother of 4, and she was shot by police officers in Seattle a couple months later. And so they had another one, like another Black Lives Matter thing, and just how like this one school wanting to like really like represent and go against like and do something for racial injustices, and then it created a movement for the whole school board. That was sort of the gist of
Oh,
it. But it made me think about is it orange shirts for residential school day in September or October? There is a
yeah,
thing. Yeah. And I
yeah.
never really thought about
Is
like
it
what,
is it October or is it February?
I don't, maybe it's February.
I don't know. I thought I saw something about February, but I could be wrong. It could have been something else. I don't know. My mind's just like compiling everything
It's
lately.
like it definitely happened when we were in St. Thomas this year, but that could have been February or September. I don't remember. What did we steal the hot dogs for that day? I thought that was for residential school. Do you remember that? Like, there was, anyway, I digress.
Hold on, I'm googling it.
Yeah, Google it, because it's, but I was just thinking, because
September
like
30th. We're
September
both wrong.
30th,
Yeah.
September 30th. I said September or October. I was sort of close.
Okay, I was really wrong, and I don't know what's happening in February.
Well, February they had the moment of silence for that. Was it an airplane crash this year when we were in Grant's class? Maybe that's what you're thinking of.
No, I thought I was reading something yesterday where there was like some kind of shirt day
Oh,
or like color day in February. I don't know.
sock day for autism. You know what? We are really sliding
Yeah.
deep off topic here. But it made me realize, like, because the main reason that I don't participate in stuff like that, I remember my sister actually, Allie G, my niece, she's in pre-primary, so she's only 4, and Katie like went to Walmart to find her an orange shirt for that this year. But I never really thought about like what it looks like if you don't participate. Like I just always had like, oh, I don't have a shirt, or oh, I forgot. But like it just sort of showed the important, like reminding me like, oh yeah, like if they're having days like that, it's super important to be a part of them, not just to show
Yeah.
your support, but sort of the opposite of like what happens if you don't show your support, how kind of wrong that looks.
How does that look? Making
Yeah.
students feel kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Make your students feel and stuff. And on those days, the importance to like talk about the issues in your classroom too, not just wear the shirt and not say anything. And I guess the importance that like one school can make such a big difference in stuff. So that was sort of that one. Is it whose turn's next? Me?
Mine.
Okay, you go girl.
So the next one I read was The Fire, and it was written kind of cool. So it was written by 2 authors, and they both wrote like a little intro, and it was about like a piece of writing or like art or something that like inspired them,
Yeah.
and how like that connects to teaching for them. And then they kind of did like a little interview / conversation, like how that's how it was formatted afterwards. So like there was like a really something that I really liked. Hold on, there was like a quote, and it said, hold on, I'm gonna pull it up. Um, so it said,
The suspense.
I know, sorry, my phone's just being really weird lately. Anyways, it says something like, we a black cis male teacher from LA and a black cis female military brat from everywhere and nowhere have both taught in the fire that scorches our throats and the psyches of our students. And then it goes on and it's like talking about this letter that like inspired one of the teachers. And it says the warning is about what will happen to humankind if we fail to raise our own consciousness of each other's lived experiences and to create empathy with one another so that all of us can survive. How even like the history we teach and the way our systems run are, hold on, it says my internet connection is unstable. So
You kind of lagged there for a second, but I definitely got
so it just kind of talked about like how our school system and like even the histories we teach are like whitewashed, and it's like the perspective that the information comes from is kind of biases the information we get, and how it's usually towards white people as like heroes and people of color as like being demonized or like othered.
yeah.
And it talked about like the importance of acknowledging this, and they talked about how they do this in their classrooms and like why they wanted to teach. So like one of the girls was that makes students of color feel like they're othered or like that they're not like important or like something like that, and instead like make a new curriculum that like incorporates them into it and like
Right.
their knowledges and like their learning and stuff like that. So that was really cool. And then it was kind of similar to the first one, um, in a way. And then um, and then he talked about like acknowledging racism and stuff like that and sticking up for students and their rights. And Um, yeah. Which it was like kind of interesting because like one of them said my rage was channeled into my lessons before I ever stepped into the classroom. I had already decided I was willing to get fired, and they were like talking about like incorporating talking about racism and like standing up against it and stuff in classrooms because one of them said how that they were in it was really hard to teach because they were in a class or teach about like trauma and racism in a class in a system that was like so built around it, I guess, because
Right.
I think she was from the South in the US, so racism is really heavy now. But, well, it's heavy everywhere, but especially in the
Sure.
South, it can be. Do you hear me? I don't know. You're like lagging.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. No, I can.
Um,
You're lagging a bit. Your internet's worse here than where you usually are. But I am definitely getting what you're saying. For sure.
okay. So yeah, it just kind of talked about that. It was really interesting. It makes me think about like the decolonization like movement that we're having here with indigenous knowledge and incorporating into schools and stuff like that.
Well, yeah, that's what I was thinking too, because we're doing that big unit plan in Indigenous studies right now.
Yeah.
And so the first thing you have to do is like figure out where you're gonna put it, like in the curriculum. And I didn't want to put it in Native studies just because I felt like, but it
Mm-hmm.
was unbelievably hard to find, like right in the New Brunswick curriculum documents, like for Canadian history. It's like the first lesson is like John A. Macdonald. So Indigenous, like a lot of treaties and stuff happened before him, and like the fact that we couldn't really
Yeah.
super find a place to fit it in, I was like, this is terrible, like terrible.
For ours, I think we're doing like something on residential schooling or like reconciliation.
Reconciliation, yeah.
And I think we're doing grade 6. And grade 6 is like a weird social studies time because, or like a good social studies time because the whole social studies curriculum in grade 6 is centered around culture.
Perfect. Yeah, as
So,
of right now, I think we're putting it in the native studies, which I'm not like, I don't really super like that idea because I think that there's lots of different places that you should
well, what are
put
you guys
First
planning on doing?
Nations knowledge. Um, treaties, peace and friendship treaties. But
You could put that in social studies, or you could do
yeah, but like what grade when you start breaking it down, like it does anyway, Alexa's on the
Canadian.
curriculum.
I don't know. Okay.
No, well, it's like there's like one little section. That's what I said. I was like Canadian history. So it was like there's like 12 sections, and one section's before John A. Macdonald, and the other 11 are John A. Macdonald and after. And I was like, well, let's put it in there.
Yeah.
But they were like, oh, it doesn't really fit with the curriculum documents. And
I feel like that just makes me think about like this is a huge part of Canadian history, and there's like no place that you actually learn about it, which is kind of crazy to me because I don't know. I feel like I did learn about it in high school, but like I don't know if it was just because of like the area I live in.
I didn't. I didn't even hear about residential schools, so I don't even want to end that sentence because I don't know the answer to it, but it's not good.
Like I remember learning about it in grade 10,
I
and
didn't.
I think we did it in middle school too.
Nope. But that could just be
Yeah.
our like what 6 7 year age gap like that, but really that could be
Yeah.
that they started in integrating it.
Mm-hmm.
But no, like we learned, like that's what I was reading in First Nations, that basically they talk about indigenous people and then they talk about the settlers coming and they just don't talk about indigenous people anymore. It's like they don't exist. Like it's like we didn't continue to learn about what they were up to. Like it was like once.
I found this really cool book the
Yeah.
other day, and it's like a history book, um but it's like from the viewpoint, and it's like for kids, like it's kind of like a storybook kind of thing,
Yeah.
and it's for kids, and it's from the viewpoint of indigenous people, and it's like usually history books start in like whenever like the settlers come and it talks about that, but this like it starts way before and it follows indigenous people and like from their perspective of like history and like how it happened like before and after like the settlers came and like they were colonized, and it looks really cool.
Sounds like a great book and a book that we
Mhm.
should all have. Absolutely. I agree. Okay, is it my turn?
Yeah, probably. Hold on. Yeah, engaging and embracing Black parents.
Yep. So I read that one, and it sort of just talked about how she wanted to kind of call the parents like at the beginning of the year, and just so she's calling for good and for bad, and how like she felt that was important, and excuse me, they weren't ready for that. And I always feel like that's something that I would sort of try and do as well. But it was interesting because then she was saying like, yeah, that sort of worked, but the quote said, it had weaponized my communications with their families as a classroom management strategy. I turned family engagement into a carrot and a stick as opposed to a collaborative effort with my students' best interest at heart. So it's like, yeah, I kind of called home, but it was more just so they'd be good in my classroom, not to like actually understand them better as a whole person, sort of. And then she had like a
Interesting.
few ideas on like how to engage black parents into like the classroom, and some of them I sort of understood, and I didn't love this chapter. I didn't mind it. Um, Too often, systems, not people, are responsible for creating and maintaining the disconnect between families and schools. And unfortunately, too often, people, not systems, are blamed. So, just basically, how people don't really engage with the parents is more of a system wide problem. But some of the ideas she had to engage and embrace Black parents is icebreaker activities. So, like, if you ever have like a big, like a student, what's it called, meet the teacher night or whatever, have like a bunch of icebreaker activities, which I don't really know. Like, I'm not sold on that yet. Like, I'm the new teacher in town, like first year there. I'm gonna get all the like the teachers or the parents playing hokey pokey. Like, I don't know yet. I'm unsure about that.
Yeah, I
That,
don't.
yeah,
I
I
just,
like
I just have questions. Was it like you get all the parents in one area together, or was it like one on one with these parents?
all the parents in one area together. So like all of,
See,
and it was
I
like
feel like I don't know how that would work because like our parent teachers are like by appointment, so like they come in at their time, they have their meeting, and right, so they're not like all there
in
together.
elementary school. Did you have meet the teacher? Like it was like literally in September, and like the parents would come and the teacher would talk to all of the parents once.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Okay, I don't know. Okay.
that's what this was. And I agree. I was like, when does this happen where all the parents are together with the teacher? I can think of only in elementary school. And just like, I sort of get the icebreaker activities, but it was like you had to physically touch the other parents, like hip to hip and knees to knees. And I was just
Um,
like, I'm unsure. I'm really unsure about
Also,
this.
like I don't know about elementary school, but my parents didn't go to like parent teacher meetings. They're like, "You're doing fine. Why do I need to go there?"
That's a
You
whole
know,
other.
like even like a lot of parents are like they don't like. I went was at parent teachers here. Like we had maybe 7, 8 parents come in for all
Really?
120 some students we taught. Yeah.
We've talked about this before, I think, but it boggles my mind that in Cape Breton, kids aren't allowed to go to parent teacher meetings. They're like not invited, which is the
That's
weirdest
weird.
thing in the world to me when I think about that. Like they should absolutely be there. They are the thing that connects the home and the school. Like
Hmm.
I don't understand why we're not allowed to go. But anyway,
Yeah.
so weird. And then she just says valuing parent perspectives and school-based parents said, and then so she said like, that they sometimes have gotten rid of things like the honor roll because they thought that it was like more geared towards people like would be successful who like weren't like non-blacks, or like that they were at disadvantage, they wouldn't get it, but that these parents really missed it because like it gave them a sense of like to work towards something. So they implemented sort of like a honor roll and on a roll system that like sort of overacts so it reaches a few more people so that they can set goals. And just that school-based parent center, she said, are really important. That's just like I guess a place that parents can go, and although it may like not seem like they're giving valuable like information, they might be talking about like EI or jobs or tutoring centers, or so having like the connections between parents is sort of important.
Hmm.
Personally didn't absolutely love that chapter. It's probably like my least favorite chapter we've read so far, but
Yeah, I don't know how like just from like what you're telling me, like I don't know how I feel about that cuz like I know when I was in school like my sister and me are 4 years apart but she failed a couple times so we only graduated 2 years apart and like for hers like they during the graduation ceremony, right? They like honored like the honor students or like people who got like a certain percentage or whatever, right?
Yeah.
By like they wore like the different sash, but like when I graduated, we didn't have that. Like we weren't allowed to do that because they didn't want to like separate those
Right.
who like did better academically than like those who didn't. But then I was like, at the same time, I was like, I worked really hard for that,
Yeah.
and like to not do that, it was like, it's just like how some like they don't want to do like academic awards or anything, but it's like you're still doing sport awards. So like, what's the difference? I guess I don't know.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I know, like, for me, we've talked about this in Grant's class, but I am like unbelievably motivated by like I went to my sister's like honor roll stuff and I understood like you get a gold if you get this and I was like, okay, so now I just have to get that, and like that's what motivated me, which probably isn't the right thing, but it does help those motivation things. But like you said, that maybe there might be someone that would never get on the honor roll, but they worked way harder than you and they have a 70 average. Like, should they be recognized? I don't know.
Yeah, I think like the thing where she was like talking about like doing recognition for like students who have worked hard, so like having
Yes.
stuff included in the academic awards that aren't just about overall performance.
Yeah. George
Right?
Street
Like
has
I think
this.
that's good. Like our school did like most improved and stuff like that. So students who like made a drastic change in like their performance and attitude and stuff like that, or like students who even though they weren't getting those high marks, but they were like focusing a lot and they were trying really hard, like they got awards too and stuff, right? So like I think just
George,
making
sorry.
it more open to other people would be good, but I think still having that recognition is good because even if the recognition isn't the drive, like sometimes just the acknowledgement of like we see you're working hard is like a good thing
George
to see.
Street has a student of the month club, and at first I was like, oh, that's sort of weird, but no, it was so sweet. I loved it. And it was like the student of the month
Yeah,
was
we had
just
that in like
chosen.
elementary school and stuff.
Yeah, and it was just based on like, it didn't have to be, there was nothing it was based on. Like it
Mm-hmm.
did, like there was no real like, it was just like, who do you
Yeah.
think should get it this week? So like they've had a lot of people like who, are way better behaved this year than last year and stuff. And then they have this little ceremony in the morning and their parents come and they kind of like do this little speech and they get a Georgie Bear, and I thought it was so cute. It was adorable. Very sweet.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, very cute. Anyway, yeah, that's it. Is it my turn?
What one are we on?
Or is it who do I
What one were
belong
you doing?
to? I just did, excuse me, engaging and embracing Black parents.
Oh yeah, so it's you next.
Who do I belong to?
Yeah.
Sort of a similar one again. Not bad. It was like she's a Black woman and she was in a class with all white kids, and then a Black student came and then he said the N-word. And then she had to make the decision to make this like kind of like a whole big class discussion that would embarrass him or just kind of take him out to the side. And basically all she did was take him out and tell him why he can't say that word. And so that's really was the gist of that. And she like actively chose not to have that discussion with her class because she just didn't feel that they were ready, and he was a new student that had just moved and that she just didn't want to put him on the spot. And that sometimes you just have to do what's right for a specific student over like maybe what's right in a whole societal way.
Mm-hmm.
That she'd have that conversation at some point, but just that day wasn't the day to have it. That's the gist.
Okay.
Yeah.
I find like something that comes up with a lot of these chapters are they're centered around like urban schools
Yeah.
where it's like Black centered classrooms where
Mhm.
or it is all Black students.
Yeah.
Some of the things that they're doing, I wonder how you could incorporate it when there's like a mix of cultures and races in your class, right? Because like some of these things I think it would be hard to implement, or like some of the discussions that they say that they
Yeah.
have, I think like
Exactly.
they would be really touchy when if it's like, like I don't know, I think it would be really hard.
Yeah, and it's almost in a weird way easier when it's like mostly Black kids in your class instead of like one or like one Indigenous person or
Yeah.
one person, like, and that's where it gets sort of difficult because you want to have these discussions but you don't want them to feel awkward or like feel like they're being like
Singled out.
exactly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because in one of the chapters, I don't remember which one it was, but in one of the chapters I read, it was talking about how, oh my gosh, I just had brain fart. Um, how you don't want your students of color to feel like they're the advocate for
Yeah,
like whole like
good way of
ethnic
putting it. Yeah.
culture race, right? Like you don't want to single them out like that, but when you're having these kinds of discussions in a classroom and there's only a few of them, like are you doing that subconsciously, I guess, like singling them out?
Yeah. Very interesting. Which brings me, I'm going to jump in front of you, I think, because I'll
Okay.
talk now. But I think it's so now we've moved to gender, right? I think is that where we're at, or no?
No,
Where
I
are
still
you?
have one race.
Oh, okay, go. Never mind.
Okay. So I really like this one. It was really good. I would read a lot more about this topic. It was really interesting. I would recommend you to read it. It was pretty good.
Wow,
It was
you're really into this one.
I did really like this one. So it's like to my
Gonna write it down. What's
teacher, colleague, sister, whatever. It's like the last one in the race section.
okay? Yeah.
And it talked about like the school to prison pipeline.
Okay.
And it was just really interesting. And they talk about how like people of color are like more likely to be imprisoned and stuff like that, and how like there's these higher rates of imprisonment in like the school to prison pipeline, how like the way the school system treats them lends them to going right to juvie.
Right.
And they talked about how like things like the just like the state of mind a lot of educators might have about like having like the good students and the bad students, and how once you're labeled a bad student, you're split down this road that kind of like gears you towards the like school to prison pipeline.
Right.
And how, because you're just kind of like pushed off to the side. And she talked about like how the zero tolerance policies are actually kind of bad because they put you in that spot where if you're a problem, then you're suspended for the day, and then you just go home. Or suspensions move to expulsions, and expulsions move to being arrested in schools. And
Yeah,
how
like suspensions and expulsions just seem like an
yeah
absolutely terrible bad idea. The last thing we should do
yeah
is
like I
not
have
let them come to school. It's so dumb.
I have a whole rant about ISS. Like I think it's the worst idea ever. I
Yeah, I
think
agree.
all your students who have problems and act up
Then
into one area
together.
for one deal with this bad idea, and then they're never dealt with again. Like you just let them, you're bad, here, go sit here and do
Yeah.
nothing. A lot of students, once they understand, oh, I can go there and do nothing, they want to go to ISS or they want to get suspended. And there's like one thing when she was talking about, and I think it was in the sexual harassment chapter, and they were talking about that I read, and they were like, oh, send someone home for, I forget what it was I did. And they're like, what did you learn from like being suspended? And they're like, I don't know, I got to sit home and watch TV all day. And that's like
Yeah.
the same thing when you suspend them. It's like, what's that really teaching them? That they get to sit at home and do video games? Like,
Yeah, if they're bad, they get to not have to like deal with exactly. No, it's so true.
yeah. So then it talked about that kind of stuff. And then it talked about how like some schools have like police officers right in the school. So like they can just go from them acting up to arresting them. And then, yeah, and how like some schools actually, I don't know if this is also true for Canada, but like some schools in the States have like headquarters right in the school so that they can arrest them right there and make like their in-school arrests like more efficient and easy and stuff like that. Yeah, no, it was crazy. And then she was talking about how, I believe it was a she who wrote this. They were talking about how um, corporal punishment, I had to look this up. I literally looked this up. Corporal punishment is still legal in, I think she said 20, but I looked it up and it's 19 states in the US.
So I can
And
slap them with a ruler?
yeah, it said, well, it says on here, it says sticks, like paddles, like all this stuff. And then it says, I looked it up. Anyways, and it says, as of 2014, a student is struck in a US public school an average of once every 30 seconds. And then it says, as of
By
2018,
a teacher? No, that's not right.
yeah,
By anybody.
as of 2018, corporal punishment is still legal in private schools in every U.S. state except New Jersey and Iowa, legal in public schools in 19 states, permitted in 18, and practiced in 15 states. I
That's
was
so
like,
weird.
mind blown. Like, this is something I've talked about in a couple of classes, and we're always talking about like how, oh yeah, there used to be corporal punishment in schools, but now we don't have that. But like, even though this is in Canada, like, this is pretty close to home.
Is it not allowed though? Like, that's what I'm just looking up now.
But in the U.S., it is. Like, in
Is
Canada,
it not allowed? Are you sure?
But in the U.S., apparently it is.
Well, Section 43 of the Criminal Code of Canada provides defense for parents, parent substitutes, and teachers who use corporal punishment to discipline a child in their care and who have been charged with physically assaulting that child. This section of the Criminal Code is often referred to as the spanking provision.
Yeah.
So
in Canada, it's not allowed. In the States, it
no,
is.
that just said that it is allowed.
Is it?
So it just said Section 43 of the Criminal Code provides defense for parents and teachers who use corporal punishment. Well, I think I found my new classroom management technique. No, I'm just kidding. That was a joke.
Oh, God. Yeah, so that was just absolutely wild to me.
Yeah, that's super wild.
And then, so it just talked about like how the zero tolerance policy actually isn't good because it doesn't solve any problems, and it just pushes the people who need more help, because that's essentially the people who are acting out need more help from us,
right,
away and like into a system that's not going to really help them either, because the prison system doesn't really help anyone.
No help. No, zero. Absolutely.
And then it talked about how like a lot of these kids who are going into juvie and like people who are going to prison and stuff, how like they have lower literacy rates and stuff because they were like usually the problem kids in schools, right? So they were always suspended or expelled or pushed out of class or kind of ignored, right?
Yeah, but from a practical standpoint, which is not, but
yeah,
like it's just restorative justice is so much more difficult to implement than just making them go sit in a classroom. But we just have to shift our thinking, like it's not working at all. At all.
Yeah. And it was just like really interesting because like I do have like my brother was in jail and like my sister's dad's been in jail, like in and out of jail her whole life and stuff. So it was like it's really interesting for me to read about, I think. And then it was also really interesting because it's not really the school to prison pipeline, but it's just like I come from like an area that has like a lot of poverty,
right,
and a lot of low income families. So like thinking about how some of those students get treated, I think, and like the biases towards them that may follow them, and like when kids get labeled like the bad kid and they get ignored in school, a lot of times they think, oh well, I'm not going to go anywhere anyways, I'm just going to go home and not do anything and not graduate and stuff like that. And like how that just like that mentality, I guess, affects students, and like the importance of like focusing on the students who are problem child instead of just pushing them aside for someone else to deal with.
I completely agree.
So yeah, that one was really good. I really liked it a lot.
Good. Love that.
Oh, there was like this one last thing. It was like the call to action at the end that I wanted to read to you.
Ready.
And it says, if you're moved by this, which I am, this brief description of how school policies and practices nudge some youth towards dropout, then I hope you'll consider grounding your approach to teaching in dismantling the school to prison pipeline and in reframing your work in such a way that the school is not a place of punishment, that the school doesn't label more people ID and LD than it does PhD and JD, which I'm not sure what all those labels mean. That the school is not the primary gateway to degrading labor, the streets, and permanent detention. I think your job is to yearn for and create the kind of classrooms and schools that folks don't need to recover from. Yeah, and that's basically it. And then it says, I think we can agree that a classroom that foregrounds love, justice, and joy is where we can begin and where we will begin again.
Beautiful.
That was really good.
Love it. Glad you liked it.
Yeah.
Cool.
I think
your turn again.
Next again, yeah. So the next one I read was under the gender and sex ed section.
Yes.
And, it was also really good. I really liked it.
I love your passion for everything.
And it was on sexual harassment.
Okay.
And it was talking about the story of this teacher and she had these two students who were really moved by this I think it was like sex trafficking lecture or like class kind of thing that they did earlier in their high school years,
Yeah.
and how they made this club, and they wanted to they had planned for like months on organizing a sexual harassment kind of workshop. So for like female identifying students, they had one on like female empowerment and stuff like that, and then for male identifying students, they had made one on toxic masculinity.
Okay, yeah.
And then they had planned to put this on one day, but then a week before they were supposed to do it, like they had planned months for this, and they like worked really hard on it. A week before they were supposed to do it, the school said that they couldn't afford to lose a day or two. I think it was 2 days. It was a 2-day workshop on this, on their workshops right before finals, like 2 weeks before finals. So they said that they couldn't do it anymore. And because sexual harassment was like a really big problem in their schools, where like and this was like right happening during the Me Too movement, and
yeah.
there was a lot of sexual harassment from students, from like the male students towards the girls, and like lifting up their skirts with like rulers and like touching them in the hallway and like saying really degrading things and stuff like that. And like it was just really crazy to read about. And then so they came to this teacher who wrote this article, and one day during her prep, and told her that they wanted to do a protest about canceling the workshop. And she was like, I was kind of scared because like I could get in a lot of trouble, so I had to make the decision of whether I wanted to like help them or to like not. But then she ended up doing like helping them because they asked if they could use her club meeting time for them to organize their protests. So they like got a bunch of people involved and from different groups, and then kind of like recruited people who they thought could help them influence others to join their protests. And they like met for a couple of weeks to plan this, and they like it was all student led by them. And then she had like talked to one of these other teachers, and he was like, he had run a feminist club or something the year before, or like started it up again. And then he was like, oh, I'm going to tell them. So then he got them involved. And then they like planned a big thing, and and they had like big discussions about like what they wanted, what their demands were, and like what they were going to do. And it was like so well organized. And like she said, every time I thought I wanted to chime in, I held myself back, and they ended up resolving like any of the questions and stuff I was going to bring up anyways, like themselves.
Really?
Yeah.
Cool.
And she was like, a lot of times like these are the discussions we want students to have, and we like try to get them to have in our classrooms and stuff like that. And in my classrooms sometimes they don't work very well, and sometimes they do. And she was like, I was really glad that this time it was one that worked really well. So like they organized a sit-in, and like promoted it on social media and everything. And they organized a sit-in, and then they had a sit-in that day, all day. And they had like students who stayed there all day, but then they had some that like came from one class just for that class period, or just came during a 15-minute break or something, right, to like sit with them. They all shared stories and like how they can work to fix like the harassment issues and stuff in the school. And it was like really good, and they said they made a lot of progress and stuff, and it was just like really cool to see. It was a good one. I didn't do a great job of summarizing it. There was a lot going on though in it, a lot of stuff they discussed, and I think it was just really cool. And then at the end they kind of talked about how it was just like the discussion that they had was what they needed to have to help fix the problem.
Right, yeah.
Right? Like the discussion circle that they created during that sit-in was what needed to be done to help, and like how that should be included, like monthly, have these like monthly big discussions on like stuff that's going around in the school and like how to fix it and stuff.
Yeah, nice to have like a really like tangible example of a way that a school did like fix or at least help fix a problem, which is always cool. Sounds great.
Yeah.
Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
My turn. Is it my turn? I think so. Yeah. So mine was in gender. I only read one in gender, but It was just a elementary school, and this teacher had two students that they didn't explicitly explain, but I'm pretty sure were transgendered, and that just like a lot of the students are sort of struggling with it. And so what he decided to do is the one in his class at during that year, he was like, why don't you help me make a unit on this? Like we talked about that earlier. So him and they constructed like a whole teaching unit plan, and then they ended up getting the other student involved who was a couple grades higher, and just how it worked so well because those two students got to really meet each other, and they got to connect because they're both experiencing this sort of bullying and trouble, like the same issues, and then just the benefits of having the students like teach the lesson and learn the lesson, and it just was really worked very well for everybody. So yeah, it was neat to see like the good idea, like we had talked about at the beginning, of just getting the students to help you with lessons with stuff like that really affect them if they want to. I thought was a really good idea. Yeah, and just how
Huh?
it opened their eyes to bullying and stuff. But yeah, it was good.
Nice.
Yeah, very nice. Yep, it was good. Is that it? Did
Yeah,
you read one more? No, that's it,
that
right?
is it.
Love it.
That's
So I
it.
feel like we talked a lot. I think we probably did we get these done?
Yeah, I
Useful
think
learning,
we
yeah.
basically cover them every time we talk.
Yeah, exactly. We got all them done. Yeah, so it was good. Loved it. I'm gonna end or stop the recording, okay?
Yeah.
Stop recording.